Hello, friends on YouTube. This is George. I always like to identify myself at the beginning of my videos. And I expect to have with me a couple of friends. We recorded a part one segment of a panel discussion, if you want to call it that, or a hangout, a very informal um, three-way talk about the subject matter, and I said we will resume in 5 minutes. Well, the 5 minutes have pretty much elapsed, but they're not back with me yet, and that's okay. I expect them to show up, and even if they don't, I will proceed with some sort of agenda here and make you a video. And what will I talk about? You know, I don't want to start into a subject in their absence. So here's AJ.
Hey there, George.
There's AJ. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Good, good, good,
Did you have a
good.
nice 5 minute break?
I was listening to a couple tracks I'm working on. I did.
Okay, good. Good. Well, I hope Salty manages to return as well. And I I found something on Elena's Telegram channel. It's pretty remarkable. Is it just a coincidence? Ha ha. So it's a picture of Donald and Melania clapping, and apparently they were listening to the operatic aria Nessun Dorma.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that happens to be Prince Ia's favorite human musical piece.
Isn't that interesting? Last night I was viewing the fireworks show that they had there, and they were playing that as the fireworks were going off.
Okay. Well, that
Hmm.
explains it. I missed that particular occasion. So anyway, there you go. There's a version of that by Jeff Beck, which is all guitar. And he
Oh,
doesn't do anything flashy, but it's absolutely gorgeous.
he's done some great things over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate Jeff Beck a lot. I saw him live once a long time ago with the Blue Oyster Cult and some other band. I didn't appreciate him at the time.
Right.
I mean, I was into some of his more jazz rock type stuff. I think, like Freeway Jam, if you remember that song.
Yes.
Um, so anyway, well, here we are. I don't know if Salty's going to make it back, and if he does, great, and if not, it's too bad. I wanted to tap his brain for some of his particular characteristic wisdom. Uh,
Yeah, he's familiar with George K. Uh, Cavasisalis.
Cavasilis. I think they've met
Cavasilis.
in person. Yeah.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
And it would be instructive to hear Salty's uh, experience with that and what he's learned from George. But
Yeah.
just prior to us cutting off part one, you were mentioning, of course, about Mars and the verification of the earthquakes there from
Yes.
the terraforming, and um, kind of followed that up here just minutes ago with this coincidence regarding the Italian opera song
Uh-huh.
being, uh, and any other kind of connecting the dots like that is always helpful and stimulating if you have any offhand.
Yeah. So I would urge anybody listening to this and you and whomever, right, to
Yes,
go visit that page that Dan Willis has created because that
right.
contains a pretty good wealth of information. And some of the some of the items are convincing on a one-off basis, right? And some
Yeah,
are more like, well, that could be a coincidence, or, well, for example, the very first one is about where there was a UFO sighting in the area of Ireland, Western Ireland, where Elena lives, and she said, "Well, they beamed me up, and I did this and I did that." And so nobody saw her get beamed up. But the fact is that there was this major UFO sighting. It was a fleet of Galactic Federation scout ships, or in generic terms, flying saucers, that
right.
showed up, right, on that particular night. And so they were there for some reason.
And there was also, which you've shared, and which I'm sure is also on Dan's page there that you've referenced, about the fleet that showed up as
Hmm.
Elena had told the attendees of one of these conferences
Yeah.
that she participates in. Can you break that down for us?
Right. Well, I can. And it's actually relatively simple. So the conferences in question, this is a series that are hosted by Danny Henderson. And Danny is another contactee. She is another person who has personally, face to face met Thorhan, been on board the Galactic Federation ships. And so she claims Elena as her best friend on or off planet. Well, it's actually a beautiful friendship, and I love both of those people, women, and I enjoy listening to Danny. Danny has an interesting personality and is very in your face about disclosure and the reality of our ET cousins and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's and confrontational, and especially confrontational toward groups like NASA. It's like, you
Yes.
don't know anything. You wouldn't know anything at all if you didn't listen to Elena and parrot what she says. I mean, things like that. She gets a little slightly overboard occasionally, but it's sort of delightful to me to hear her standing up, for the truth, as it were. But anyway, so Danny has these conferences, and so the caliber of people there, if you are interested in contactees, is first rate. She got Alex Collier out to come out of retirement to speak at the one in September 2024, and Alex has been talking for 30 years about his personal contact with Andromedans, and I believe they are from the Andromeda Galaxy, if I'm not mistaken. But these are the guys that have the ships that are 800 miles in diameter,
Right.
spherical ships, and they're fifth density people too, who um, normally, fifth density is invisible to us, but they can step down the frequency of like their entire ship, into third density. And Alex was saying very interestingly, he said, yeah, they bring their ship into my backyard, and you say, well, it's 800 miles in diameter, so how do they do that? He said, well, it's only 100 meters in diameter when it shows up in my backyard, but the inside is much bigger than the outside. I don't know how they do that, but they do.
It's an MP3 of a WAV file.
Well, I mean, they brought him aboard, okay?
Yeah.
He stayed with them for 90 days, for 3 months. And but they made him wear a belt, so he wasn't able to step up his frequency to fifth density and stay there for days on end.
Sure.
And so this belt would take their fifth density matter and step it down so that he would have breathable air and drinkable water and edible food, all the necessities for his
Yeah.
his body. But he said, be walking around the ship, yeah, you can see it in, you know, there's a third density version of it, but he says a lot of it looks gray and kind of nondescript. But if you're seeing it
Yeah.
in fifth density, it has all these colors that we can't see, right? I mean, so like if we can see 2 million colors, they must be able to see 2 billion, right? Or
Yeah.
something like that. Ah, Salty's back with us. Welcome back, Salty. Happy to see you. Can you hear me? He's got to get his mic working. Just butt in when you get connected. So yeah, we were talking a little bit about. I actually went off on a digression, talking about Alex Collier and his revelations concerning the fifth density Andromedans that he's in contact with. But anyway, it was just an example of the caliber of people that are at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection conferences that Danny Henderson has put together.
And
And
one of which, as
yeah,
we were revisiting this topic, one of which, as Elena told the participants, they would be anticipating seeing a fleet of these ships. And indeed, this happened. And
yes.
George was breaking down the details of this. Go ahead, George.
Right. So to conclude what I was saying, there were Alex is an example, but there were a lot of other high caliber people there, including my acquaintance Jerry Wills. There's a story about Jerry which we could talk about another time. But I've met him, and he's a interesting man. Anyway, yeah. So Danny had spoken before the conference with Elena. And she said, "Do you think that we could get an overflight, a flyover by Galactic Federation scout ships that people on the ground can see, so that we have a physical demonstration of the reality of what you're talking about, of your claims?" And Elena said, "I don't know. I'll ask Thorhan." So she asked him, and he said, "Yes, of course. We'll be happy to do that. When do you want me to do it?" And she said, "Well, on Thursday at 1 o'clock or whatever the time was. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly. Right. I don't remember. But they had prearranged a particular time, and so the conference took a break, and everybody went outside, and there were 1,000 people with their heads tilted back, looking up at the sky. And so they started seeing these ships coming over, and the Galactic Federation ships were flying above a 62-mile limit set by NORAD. So NORAD says anything that's below 62 miles and within this volume of space or volume of air, atmosphere, is in our jurisdiction. It's a no-fly zone. It's a no-fly zone. So unless we know who you are and what you're doing there, you're likely to get shot down, right?
Yeah.
So these ships were like little dots from the ground, but you could see these formations of little dots flying
Yeah.
overhead, and the formations were not static; they were changing. Much as groups like the Blue Angels will change their formations in flight.
Yeah.
And so they saw that, and the bonus was they had a TR-3B, and I'll explain what that is momentarily. But that flew over at low level because that's a terrestrial vehicle. So the TR-3B is a triangular craft, which is of human manufacture. It uses anti-gravity technology. It's military. It's classified. They're not supposed to exist, despite the fact that, of course, many people have seen them on many
Yeah.
occasions.
Yes.
And they're very large. They're 600 feet on a side, equilateral triangles. So one of
Wow.
those flew over, and was visible as a triangle. Uh, so it was within the 62-mile limit and actually probably less than a mile high. So it looked really big from the ground. So
Yeah.
this went on for a while, for the better part of an hour, I guess, or at least for a number of minutes. And video was made of it, and
Yeah,
it's
I've seen a
posted on
few
YouTube.
clips of that video. People cheering and way up there, lights doing aerial maneuvers that
Yeah.
one usually hasn't seen aircraft do until the last couple decades.
Uh-huh.
Circle, very abrupt turns, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, interestingly, also Elena has on it, so it's in one of her books, but she's also done live discussions of it on YouTube about the spaceship drive technology, how it works, and such that I guess, and this is not really unique to Elena. This information has been leaked, based on human reverse engineering projects and things like that. So the Germans, National Socialists, Nazis, if you like that term, had their own version of it, the Haunebu craft, which worked, and they were on the moon in the 1930s, 30 years ahead of the Americans, prior to World War II.
Right.
Anyway, and went on to explore the solar system and developed a colony on Mars and so forth and so on. I'm not here to talk about all that stuff, which Dan Willis has some excellent presentations about, history since 1945 and even going back a little bit earlier.
Right.
But anyway, then you also had this craft called the Flex Liner, and the person can look that up online. So that's all very valid information. And then Elena's information is very similar, probably incorporating a few more details about how those craft are designed and how they work. And um, so, I mean, you don't normally see them flying around, except maybe you might see a TR-3B if you're in the right place at the right time. But this technology has been known to humans for quite a long time. It's just one of those things that is not publicly acknowledged.
Yeah. I've seen medieval era paintings and later eras. Usually they're Christian paintings depicting certain events,
Mhm.
but a number of these paintings have in the skies very UFO looking like objects.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's one in particular that where the sky was filled with them, and they were said to be and having been engaged in a battle.
Mm.
And a recent disclosure by Dr. Sala. Well, I shouldn't say it's really. It was like something he passed on. It was on somebody's channel on YouTube, and they alleged, and I don't have proof. It's just an allegation, but they said, yeah, humanity had open contact and commerce with crypto-terrestrial civilizations, which is advanced civilizations that live beneath the Earth's surface.
Hmm.
And supposedly, according to one of Elena's videos in which she was speaking with somebody from one of those civilizations, they said there were 14 different underground civilizations that inhabit the earth along with us, along with the surface dwelling humans.
That is just science fiction type of information, but
Yeah.
here's an interesting corroboration with that.
Uh-huh.
Last year, I was in Georgia. We were staying out at Tybee Island, and at the B&B where we were was a history book of Georgia. And right in the beginning of the book, it relates a Cherokee history. And
Yeah.
the Cherokees claim that when they came to that area, southeastern Georgia,
Hmm.
they defeated a moon eyed, quote
Yes.
unquote, people.
Yeah.
And so this to me would imply people who lived underground.
Yeah. Well, I think it was actually said that they mainly lived underground.
Uh huh.
Yeah.
So these things, once again, and this goes back to Black Elk
Hmm.
and his including the Star Nation people in his invocation prior to telling his story to his biographer. So, and I have no doubt that the Australian Aboriginal people, many indigenous people like the Mayas, Mayan people down in Central America.
Mm.
There's those famous stone engravings of people inside of what looks like space suits, other similar type of pictographs.
Hmm.
A lot of the current information that is coming out, I found a lot of cross reference and corroboration with indigenous people's lore.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you bring up the Maya. If you watch that interview of Michael Salla with John Vivanco, John drops the intel that the Maya and the Olmecs were from Mars. They were refugees from Mars.
Aha. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. This goes to this, what I believe was a soft disclosure that was made in the original Star Wars trilogy films
Hmm.
about the Empire and the rebels fighting the Empire and this weapon, the Death Star, which could corroborate Flanders exploding
Yep.
planet theory that he says used to occupy what is now the asteroid belt.
Hmm.
This was a planet that was exploded
Yep.
via scalar technology
Hmm.
in a war between rival civilizations in our solar system,
Yep.
planets next to each other. Somehow the pyramid structures in Giza are related to this. I know Gene Decode calls these the Pyramid Wars.
Hmm.
Joseph Farrell has also researched deeply into this.
Yeah.
Um, this is information that comes from a number of different sources, but
Yeah.
when you cross reference it, uh, it all ties together into one narrative.
Indeed.
Also, this Epic of Gilgamesh
Hmm.
is tied in to this quote war in the heavens and our true history of our solar system.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing, when one starts doing the deep dive and goes down all the little rabbit holes, your view of the context, let's just say, of the human experience expands tremendously, and there's all this science fiction-y type stuff that well, at least I've come to realize it's all real, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
not all of it, but certain things that most people would consider very incredible. So what you're talking about regarding the asteroid belt, apparently is absolutely true. And Elena talks about it, right? There was a
Yeah.
planet there, and it was home to multiple intelligent races, as the Earth is, as many planets are, right?
Yes.
And it was destroyed. It blew up, and then a lot of the debris hit Mars and blasted one whole hemisphere of Mars,
Right.
and was the principal event that basically destroyed the planet or made it much, much less habitable. It used to be a green, beautiful, paradisiac world like the Earth basically is, right?
Right.
And the Sasquatch supposedly are originally from that planet, and some of them went to Mars and some went to Earth. And there are still some on Mars, and most of them are on Earth now. So, what else? Well, then there were human inhabitants on Mars who ended up here. Mars also has reptilian and insectoid races, and the reptilians are still there, and there are multiple insectoid. I don't know if you call them races, but they actually call them clans, insectoid clans
Uh-huh.
that live on Mars. Mars apparently is home to many different species. There are Metons and Solosi from Alpha Centauri there who are humans, and the Galactic Federation, Arahil, are there. Arahil and Tal, I guess, and you know, Sasquatch and insectoids and reptilians. I mean, it's just lots of people, but they live underground. Um, And the Germans were there. There was, a German colony there, which was moved on outside of the solar system because they're not welcome. Not welcome anymore.
Right.
Uh, yeah, but somebody else whom I follow who I think has some credibility. I'm not really sure, fully certain how much credibility to give her, but Penny Kelly, who's a lovely old lady. She's really a remarkable person. Um, but she says every planet in the solar system is inhabited by multiple races. I mean, probably didn't say that, but I'm adding that based on what Elena has said. And it's almost all underground. Earth is one of the very rare planets where people can live on the surface.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And the
George
other,
Cavasalis had an interesting comment about the insectoid intelligent races. In this interview with Michael Salla, he was saying that due to the evolution of of the galaxy,
yeah,
when conditions were different, intelligent life needed first to have a hard outer shell.
yeah,
And this was the epoch that the insectoid people developed in.
yeah,
And then later, those of us with the skeletons on the inside and soft on the outside, when conditions were such that we could develop like that,
yeah.
that happened.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And he said insectoids came first and then reptilians and later mammalian and other, I guess there are avians and other models as well, feline
Right.
peoples and so on. Feline is more
Salty.
of a specific mammalian, but you got the humans who are kind of like uh, apes, essentially. That's what
Right.
we're most similar to.
Hominids.
Yeah,
Um, Speaking of George Cavasala, Salty, are you there?
Salty left us.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, he
We
was here
were just
briefly and then
wondering
he
if
went
he
on
was
to other
there
things.
because he has met George,
Yeah.
and it would be great to hear Salty's take on what he's learned from George.
Yeah, well, he did mention that to me in an email and said that he was, I don't know, a charming fellow, which
Hmm.
we could sort of tell that from his
Yeah.
interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a great on-screen persona.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the one sticking point that some people pointed out was Elena has really emphasized that the Galactic Federation of Light is a psyop and there is no such thing. And then George comes out and he's talking about Federation of Light. Oh no, it's actually Confederation of Light. But then people are saying, well, you can't federate light. So I don't know. I mean, you could say of light doesn't mean that the light itself is federated. It just means we're
Right,
all following the light, right? Whatever that means.
right.
Spiritual light, I guess, a positive path.
Yeah,
So anyway, but I felt that him saying it's a confederation or it's a group of federations, it's an alliance, right? And,
right.
and Elena speaks of the Nataru Alliance, Nataru being the ET name for the Milky Way. So I don't know what
Uh-huh.
all is out there. There are hundreds or thousands of civilizations, and I'm sure there's one
Yeah,
somewhere that's something to do with light somewhere.
yeah.
So I'm not discrediting George on the basis of him bringing that matter to light. Excuse my pun.
Yeah, we've got the multi-variable uh, semantic designations, and sometimes this can get contradictory.
Huh.
So it is good to try and unify terms, and that can help everyone get on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, if I see something or hear something and it's not immediately they don't sync up perfectly right away. It doesn't discredit anybody in my mind. It's like further clarification is needed. What is meant here? Are you
Yeah,
really contradicting each other, or is it just kind of superficial? Does it just
right,
superficially appear that you might be, right?
right.
Somebody was talking about her friend who's a gray who lives on Venus, blah blah blah. And Elena says, no, no, the grays are the most deceptive species, and blah blah blah. Well, she also says there are grays, there are civilizations follow that are they're of the gray family, like there are different human species on different planets. And some of them are fine people and they're very advanced and loving, and there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah,
So, just because somebody says, "Oh, I know a Gray and he's a great person," and they say they know him by whatever means, that doesn't automatically necessarily mean that they're spouting nonsense and they're part of that they're brainwashed by the dark side or something like that.
yeah,
You don't jump too readily to those conclusions. But I think the point Elena is mainly trying to make is if you go on YouTube, you'll see Galactic Federation of Light channels, I mean,
yeah, and
channels,
I've seen
YouTube
those.
channels, and people who channel entities that claim to be of that group. And she's saying
Yeah,
that's a fake. That's spreading disinformation. Now, it could be that 90% of what they're saying is correct and aligned with what the Galactic Federation of Worlds is doing. She also said that on occasion, people from the Galactic Federation of Worlds have represented themselves as being of light. So, it's confusing.
yeah. Well, as this topic continues to further emerge in mass consciousness, all of these details, I'm sure, will be examined and sorted out.
I agree. And I'm not too impatient about it. It's like
Right.
give it time. And we'll find out what's real and what isn't exactly 100% real.
Yeah. Well, it,
Um, yeah, because speaking of the light, when I talk about the light and the dark, or the white hats and the black hats, or
yes.
whatever, that kind of terminology. The bad guys, the ones who were really fomenting the worst of all this stuff, apparently were the Sakaar and the Nebu, and on the human side, the Fourth Reich or the Sixth Reich. George Cavazos says
Hmm.
Sixth Reich. Well, whatever. It's the evolution of the Nazi Party or the
Right.
National Socialists. And they all those groups have been kicked out, exiled from the solar system, and they won't be allowed to come back, for the foreseeable future. And maybe if they do try to come back in the more distant future, they won't be able to make any headway because humanity will be mature enough to know what we're dealing with and say, no, we don't want anything to do with you. Thanks very much. You know,
Right.
take your take your stuff elsewhere, your agendas and your ideas and your deals. Yeah. But there was something Elena said about how the Sakaar were dumped in Nataru from another dimension where the people were sick of them and didn't want to deal with them
Oh.
anymore. They sent them here, and she said that the Galactic Federation is trying to come up with, the means of doing the same thing again. It's like
Right.
it's too bad, you shouldn't dump people like that on your neighbors.
No.
But they don't. But they also like genociding them would kind of go against their values.
Yes. Right.
So
Well,
it's a problem.
apparently, this ultimatum or deal that the GFW gave to these group of people, and that might be helpful
Yeah.
to outline, but
Yeah.
this seems to be one of their solutions to that very issue you just described.
Yeah, if they could be confined, so take away their technology, but give them, enough to be relatively comfortable and put them in a restricted place where you can watch them and make sure they don't, you know, cause trouble. And just say, okay, look, here's a nice place for you to live out your lives. And even, well, really and truly, apparently, from a spiritual perspective, the purpose of all this is for us all to evolve in a positive direction eventually over time. And for some people, it may take millions and millions and millions of years of being lost in, predatory behavior before
Yeah.
they finally wake up and say, maybe there's a better way. Um, so yeah. And it's kind of like I think it was Courtney Brown, Farsight Institute. He said you can't really get rid of them, because they'll incarnate in some other form.
Right. Well, this is the current circumstances we find ourselves in here on Earth, and looking at the last 100 years of our history, and there's got to be a better way
Yeah,
that we can all live together. And to me, it makes sense, this uh, idea that life is seeded into planetary worlds. Life is seeded from the center of the galaxy. This harkens back to this panspermia idea
hmm
of Lynn Margulis. Don't know if I pronounced her last name right,
yeah.
but
I don't know either.
it makes sense that indeed, if we are way out on the end of one of the arms of our galaxy, it would make sense that we're one of the civilizations that is not very far along in development, and that there's other civilizations closer to the galactic center that have been around longer
But time's
and are
running
much,
out. We have
much
less than a
further
minute, so can you finish that sentence?
developed.
And then
Yeah,
we're done. Sorry.
no worries. And but anyway, it seems that that has some credence, and so being uh, that human intelligence has compassion, I wouldn't be surprised at all that there are Star Nation people who have great interest in trying to create a better place here on Earth.
Yeah. So that was our part two of panel discussion. And I want to say a special thanks to my friends AJ and Salty for joining me in this discussion and for their participation. I'd like to have them both on again. Next time, we'll make sure that Salty gets to talk more. Um, I think we had a situation because of the time difference between where I am in Arizona, USA, and where he is in Australia, that uh, he had to go take care of things in his early morning, whereas it was afternoon here. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for your interest. I would appreciate it if you would like, comment, subscribe, any or all of the above. And there will be information in the description about my Facebook groups if you want to join one of those. There are two, and they have slightly different purposes. And we'll have more panel discussions. And as you could see, some parts of the discussion were a little livelier because there were two people involved, and maybe questions that were discussed were things that were also on your mind, your inquiring mind, all right? Inquiring minds want to know, as National Enquirer reminds us. And so we try to bring forth material here that will satisfy need to know and desire to know. And as AJ brought out at the beginning of part one, it's really important to try to sort out as much as we can what's accurate and what is not, or what's reliable and what is perhaps less reliable. Could be true, might not be true. But there are relative differences in reliability of bits of information. So, one thing that's important to satisfy the human mind is that a consistent story or narrative be developed, a consistent worldview, if you will, if it's a very big narrative. And certainly the ones narrative we're discussing here, or narratives, would be very important, very comprehensive. So it's all the more important to get it right. It's not religion, but it's kind of like religion in a way, right? Because if you're a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Jew or a Zoroastrian or a Muslim, whatever the case may be, you have a particular worldview, and it's quite different from the other worldviews mentioned in some ways. There are certainly some commonalities, and you may wish to focus more on those than the differences, but the differences make a difference, don't they? So, with that thought in mind, and I'll just leave it there. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope you'll be with us for the next panel discussion type video that gets published here. And that you'll give attention to the other videos that I'm periodically producing in between the group discussions. So, see you later. Hasta la vista, as I like to say, in Spanish, of course, with a terrible accent, I'm sure. So, my apologies to Spanish speaking listeners. Bye for now.